Okay, welcome back. We just finished talking about how object-oriented programming. Now we're going to have a couple of chapters on this, so just if you didn't all sink in, that's okay, because we're going to come back. So on to page 9, where they start talking about the Android Studio. This thing is called an Integrated Development Environment, IDE. That's just a cool term. Almost all development platforms are IDEs, and the idea is that I can write my source code, I can compile it, I can test it, I can debug it, I can run it all inside this one thing. I don't have to switch around to other things to make it happen. Okay, and of course it includes an emulator, so I don't have to have like a physical phone attached. And if you're lucky enough to have an Intel processor plus all the rest of these prerequisites for the Intel accelerator, then your device is going to run relatively nice. It's going to be almost the same as if you had a physical phone as far as its speed. Okay? Now, if that's not the case, well, then your emulator is going to run rather slowly. There's nothing we can do about that. Now, I mentioned about the Android development kits, the APIs. When you bring up the device, well, actually, if you bring up the, let's go and show what I'm talking about. So if I go to Tools, and there's a Sdk Manager. And here's all of the types of Android that it wants. Now, if you were go in here and say, I want them all, and you light them all up and say, yeah, sure, go ahead and do that. We're talking maybe an hour or more of downloading. There is tons of stuff here. So I've only downloaded the latest version of Android called 11. By the way, they used to have really cool names. They had candy kind of names. You can see Jelly Bean and Kit Kat and Lollipop and all the rest of that stuff. And then, I don't know, they got bored, I guess. Now they're just using letters. So now we're at R. Like, geez. But anyway, I've only installed the number 11. I didn't bother to install any of those things in my emulator. So I'm writing as if I'm running Android 11. But I've thrown in some backwards compatibility stuff. So it'll reach all the way down to 16, which is Jelly Bean. So if you have an older one than that, well, then too bad. Okay, that's basically how that works. So that's kind of sort of the end of this chapter. The rest of it talks about doing the install in that first demo, which we've already done. Okay, so I'm ready to move to chapter 2. Okay, chapter 2 on page 35. All right, here we go. So they talk about the log output. When you're running one of these things, you're going to be able to see this thing down here, this thing called log cat. So I'm going to click on this guy, and it's going to bring him up, doink, and it's going to show some stuff where it's just out there talking. Okay, it's trying to talk to my emulator. Okay, and it's just going to continue to talk. There's tons and tons of conversations going on. Don't bother what all that is. But when you're debugging stuff, we're going to show how that works a little later. We're going to add code, for example, to our application, and then we're going to watch and see things that pop up here. One of the things you can do is you can filter this to show exactly what you want. For example, I only want to show the application that we're running, which we're not really running anything. That's why it's blown out. And I can go in here and say, no, I just want the information pieces, okay? Because there's lots of levels here. There's debugging and information and warn and error and da-da-da-da-da. Info basically means, no, just give me the stuff that I'm displaying as far as error messages. Okay, so this is kind of sort of important. You need to know about this and how to do the search feature. For example, if, well, again, later on when we start using this, we're going to give it a tag. Don't worry about what that means. And then it's going to be easy for us just to go through and hunt for that tag, and it'll only show us those things that we want. Okay, so take a minute with the book and kind of poke through this thing to understand how that filtering works, how to do the filtering on the type, and how to do a filtering by keyword. Okay. All right. So the next thing you talk about is exploring the main activity tab. Okay, so this is kind of set up, a right-hand box and a left-hand box. So the main activity is the one that's on the right hand, and this is where you have your Java files. Now, you obviously could have an awful lot of more Java files. So here, only thing I have is main activity. But if I wanted to add another Java file, I would click on this guy and say new, and then tell, hey, I want a new Java class, right? So there would be multiple ones of these things showing up. And then to get to look at them, you just click on them and they pop over here on the right-hand side, right? No big deal. Okay, so let's look at the package. On line 1 in my application here, it's what I call a reverse URL. You know how URLs would have like my application example.com, right? Well, this is in reverse order. It's the com first and then the example. And by the way, if you were a real software house, you wouldn't call it example. It would be, you know, Kumquat Industries. So it would be, you know, if you had a website that said kumquat.com, here it would be com.kumquat. And then the name of the application you're working on. You know, I'm not suggesting you go out and get your own domain name just so you can do this class. So we're just going to stop with example. That's just fine. But this reverse URL is designed to make sure that your application, in this case it's called my application, is absolutely unique in the world. That's the goal behind this. And the way to do that is to use a URL that only you have. Now, clearly that's not going to work for us because we're students and everyone's using the exact same example.guy. But if you were to publish this app, you're going to have to go in there and change this guy to your domain name that you have, and make sure you register your domain name so that no one else later on can come in and say, well, no, kumquat.com belongs to me. I mean, you can't just make up this stuff. You're going to have to actually own the domain name to be able to pull this off. Okay, so the idea is this package name should be unique in the world. No one else should be able to use this package name. That's not how we're doing it, but that's okay. You understand the concept here. Good. Imports. Now, if you notice, there's a little plus sign right here. And I'm going to click on the little plus sign. This is just, it's called collapsing. It talks about the things that it has to have in there. Now, normally I just leave this guy collapsed. I'm just going to click on it a second time. And because I don't pay much attention to that stuff, normally things get added to the import line all by themselves. We rarely have to go up there and type anything. But that's okay. And then we have this thing called a main activity, which is the name of our class. So the name of our class is main activity. And then if you remember from your Java class, we're using the extends keyword, which means I'm inheriting. I'm inheriting from this thing called app compat activity. You actually have two choices. Well, probably more than that. Normally, but if you were not trying to make your application compatible with all the older versions, you could have just extended activity. Okay, activity is the base class for all Android applications. We've chosen, or the machine has picked for us, this app compat activity, which is basically just a super duper version of that, which includes extra code to make it more backwards compatible with some of the older devices. Okay? So it provides new features on devices that wouldn't normally have it. In other words, it brings more to the table. Cool. And then there's an Oncreate method. Okay, you guys know what a method is, right? Good. And I'm overriding this method, which means that most likely this guy that I'm inheriting from has an Oncreate. You remember all this from your Java class, don't you? Okay. I'm passing it a thing called a bundle, and then I'm using super. Super means I want to go to the base class and run that method first, and then after I run the very same method, I want to pop down and then do some more stuff. Okay. Now there's a thing called R, which we haven't defined. R is defined for you. So R dot something is the machine's way of keeping track of all of the resources that have been put together. So R basically stands for resources, capital R. Later on, we're going to show where all these things come from. For example, that one says R.layout. We could just keep going here. And so that's how so R.layout.activity main. That's how we got to that thing. That kind of makes sense? Okay, good. So let's go look at one of those things. Now, the layout, in other words, the layout is graphically what you see, right, is done in an XML file. And you go, oh my. By the way, I'm going to turn this thing off. First of all, it takes up an awful lot of screen space, plus there's an awful lot of chatter going on, which I don't care about. So this is what the thing is supposed to look like. Now, I will tell you they have two different views. This is supposed to be the result view, and this is what's called the blueprint view. And the reason for having a blueprint view is if I have one control on top of another control, in the view, this first one, the white box, it's dang difficult to select the one behind, right? Because, you know, the mouse would click and it would click on the one that's on top. But the blueprint view will actually allow you to get through and click on things. I rarely use the blueprint view, I'm just saying. Okay, so here they have this thing called code and split. Code just shows me the XML file. Now we're going to be swapping back and forth between the two. You could, if you had a big enough screen, go for split, where it actually shows them both. My screen's not big enough, so I can't do that. So either we're going to be in the design view, and we're probably going to use this attributes thing. So let's say, for example, I'm going to click on this hello world guy, and I'm going to click on attributes, and this little panel is going to pop up. And then I'm going to have an awful lot of things I can do associated with that text view. Okay? I have to dismiss that because I don't have enough room. But again, an XML file. If you don't know what an XML file is, that's okay. It's not required. It's just that this is what an XML file looks like. It's all color-coded for you. All XML files start with a, just like an HTML file. They start with an angle bracket and end with an angle bracket. Okay, that's how they work. So here's the beginning angle bracket for this thing called a text view, and here's the ending angle bracket for that thing called a text view. Okay, that kind of makes sense? Good. All right, so there is an awful lot of geeky goodness here. One of the things I want to show you is this thing's called a constraint layout. So in this particular case, when we pick the blank empty, when we pick the empty activity, it picked for us a placement type. And constraint is actually kind of weird. I don't really understand why they did it here in this empty activity, because quite frankly, it's not the best choice. I'm just saying it's not. There's an awful lot of other things which are probably have done a lot better. One called linear layout, so most of the time we're going to start with this empty and we're going to go there and whack this current layout and start over from scratch. I'm just saying. Okay. So a constraint layout means everything that's placed on the design surface is in a particular location, okay? Where you go and you tell it, I want it 40 pixels to the left and 80 pixels to the right, that kind of stuff, where you're extraordinarily precisely putting things where you want them. That is not normally the way you write an Android application, which is, again, kind of confusing. So a constraint, or actually a layout is basically like a container that contains all the rest of the controls. Now, we have a special name for these controls. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. This is kind of hard to see. So all I have is a little text box here that says hello world right there. Now, for reasons, I don't know why, they call these things widgets. Okay? I guess because way back in the day, in the early Java days, we had the Java, we had the abstract widget toolbox. So these, I may say widget, I may say control. Control is kind of more of a modern term to describe a text box or a button or something like that. But they call them widgets, and so I'm going to try to call them widgets if I can get away with it. Okay, once again, we're coming up on the 15-minute mark. You guys know how this works. I'm just going to stop the video, and we'll pick it up in part 3.